What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is the deep dive. And today we're talking about John, or the third book of John. It's going to be awesome.
The third letter of John.
Third letter of John.
Or epistle, if you're being formal.
Yeah. You ready to get into this?
Let's do it. Third John. Hey, Nick, we always have a little banter here and you usually ask me questions. I have a question for you.
Oh, no.
Because I know you have direct access to the lovely Rachel, who is our connection person. And just in full disclosure, you people, I'm looking at this camera. I never know which camera to look at. But, you know, we record this on Mondays, but it's Wednesday, Ash Wednesday. And we're like consolidating Fat Tuesday into Ash Wednesday with our pancake dinner before our Ash Wednesday
Y'all
service.
should come on out. It'll be a good time.
100% it will be. But pancakes, what toppings are we going to have? What toppings do you like?
Okay, so what toppings we're going to have, I don't know. I kind of let Rachel run her thing. She's such a good hospitable person that I just kind of get out of the way when she's doing her events.
She doesn't ask your input?
Not really, which is probably why it goes really good.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm kind of a normal pancake person. Like, just give me the butter, give me the syrup, and we'll go with it.
You're not a root and fruity, fresh and tooty, or whatever that thing
No.
Yeah.
No, not normally. I can sometimes go with strawberries and some whipped cream and stuff like that if I'm feeling festive.
The reason I ask this is I have very strong opinions about pancake toppings.
This is the thing you're going to have strong opinions about?
I have strong opinions on it.
Fair enough.
Sorghum syrup. You ever had sorghum syrup?
I don't even know that I know what sorghum syrup is.
It's a southern thing, yeah. And the sorghum syrup that you get like from a farmer's market that has the white label that just says sorghum syrup on it is the best, not from like Kroger or something. So what I'm going to do for the lovely Rachel is try to procure some sorghum syrup before Wednesday night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I will say Rachel has this buttermilk syrup that she makes.
Okay.
It's basically butter and sugar.
Yeah.
With a few other things. It is really good. I will give it that.
Okay.
But we're here today more so to dive into 3 John.
100%, not pancakes.
This is, I mean, pancakes are good.
Yeah.
I like a good stack for sure. But what, talk to us about your sermon this past week. What was your kind of quick breakdown?
Okay, so we finished up the Little Book, Big Story series with 3 John, the shortest book in the Bible. And so it gets right to the point, but just a quick synopsis for everybody. It's a letter that we are saying that John the disciple wrote. There are folks that would say that maybe it wasn't John, but for the sake of our discussion, we're saying that it was John the apostle wrote to a particular congregation. And unlike 2 John that we talked about last week, it's written to an individual. The individual's name is Gaius, who is apparently a friend of his. And the reason he wrote it to him and not the church was apparently John had tried to write a letter to this church, and this guy named Diotrephes had intercepted it. Now, we don't know who Diotrephes is. He could have possibly even been the pastor of the church, but he certainly was a leader. But what we gather from it, it was a toxic individual who got the letter, said, no, I'm not showing it to the church. You know, we're intercepting it. And so John is writing about that and saying, you know, some things about Diotrephes and, you know, how they're going to handle it. So, you know, the whole letter, which is very short, deals with what do you do with a toxic leader or a toxic individual in the church, which to end this series with is kind of a wide open sort of subject, right?
Yeah, this is a pretty big conversation. And if we're really kind of honest when it comes to toxicity, it's not one that people generally like. You know, we actually we really like a couple weeks ago, we were talking about being peacemakers and peacekeepers.
Yeah.
That is our comfort zone as Christians. I think calling people out into toxicity and stuff like that is not really our comfort zone.
Right.
But before we get too far in, I do want to acknowledge that I I think a lot of us have experienced this toxicity, and we want to be mindful of that. We're not trying to pick scabs that have been present or whatever. Uh, and we know that this conversation is a wide open conversation. So we're going to do our best to be mindful,
Right.
but also stick to the facts and hopefully it kind of empower us to see toxicity and
Right.
feel toxicity. Um,
We are kind people. I mean, I think
yeah,
we are. I think we try to be kind people. I mean, churches are generally a place of grace, and we tend to give people a pass. We tend to know that no one is perfect, that people make mistakes, people have opinions, people have strong opinions. I make mistakes as
yeah.
a pastor. I have opinions, strong opinions as a pastor. And so, it's difficult when someone comes along that can be someone like Diotrephes, or however the heck you pronounce it. Diotrephes.
Just say it confidently. Nobody's going to question you.
Yeah. So some individuals come along that have strong opinions that are kind of bullies. Because in the letter, he talks about the Diotrephes, will not allow an outside opinion. In fact, he puts out people in the church who try to take these people in. John is sending missionaries to this church, and he's not even welcoming them in, and is putting out people that would try to welcome them in. And so, it's a difficult subject. How do you deal with toxic people? How do you deal with bullies within the church? Because they do show up. We just, as people of grace, have sometimes trouble being a little confrontational with them. So what do we do?
And just another side note is that we're also wanting to talk in this space of not specifically our church or your church, whoever's watching, but more kind of like in general. We're not trying to start a witch hunt for toxicity in our own church or anything like that.
Right. I'm not saying it's here. I haven't seen it here. I've only been here 6 months. I'm not saying it's not ever been here. Every church that I've ever been has had sort of, a tendency to allow people like that because of our grace.
We're certainly not exempt from it.
We've all heard horror stories.
Correct.
Or maybe have been a part of a church or heard of a church or heard of an organization even that had that. The thing about it is that every single day there are amazing businesses, there are amazing churches, there are amazing causes that miss their mission because someone allowed toxic leaders to sabotage the work. And so they miss their mission. And so as we try to be people that are on the mission of making disciples for Jesus Christ, what do we do when there are people that come amongst us that have other agendas?
So maybe where we kind of start this conversation is, how do we identify toxicity? What are maybe some signs of somebody who is toxic, Dave?
Yeah, I think one thing is to look at this letter of John and why it ended up being canonized. I don't know really another part of the Bible that specifically deals with that. I mean, there is a part that I'll read later where Jesus talks about how to do church discipline, but that deals with toxicity, toxic leaders within the church. I think one of the things is that there's a lack of accountability. This man, John, was clearly the person that was trying to send accountability into these churches. His role as the elder of probably a network of churches. And this person just isolated themselves. So if you see a church that is isolated themselves, that is cut themselves off from any kind of accountability, I think that is a strong indication of that. The other, I think, attribute that you see is that he says that he's talking about John and his message and saying, undermining things to his congregation about that. And so once again, I think that's a red flag when you hear that.
Like kind of this us versus them mentality.
Right. Yes. We're the ones that
divisiveness.
have the truth. This person from the outside, is trying to attack us or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I sometimes even wonder, like, how does somebody double check accountability? I think accountability is probably one of the most important things for any person in leadership, but even in just kind of like your general Christian walk, like to have space to where you have somebody around you who loves you enough and who cares about you enough, that's willing to call you out enough. I think that is a true sign of love, and a big theme in all of these books, these short stories that we caught, is love, which is a big theme throughout the Bible. But how do we call somebody out in love? Is maybe something we'll talk about later. But I don't know. I think it's quite interesting as we start seeing some of these attributes. How do people like get in power and not have people around them?
Yeah, well, just to echo what you were saying, it is, I think our aim, as we are looking for the middle, we are always looking at the person of Jesus Christ and his teachings and the fruit of the Spirit and trying to bear that. And so if we are focusing on Jesus and moving towards that, but also I think there's some self-awareness that goes on, that we have to understand that we need accountability.
Yeah.
And maybe as we're here, we're releasing this on Ash Wednesday, part of Ash Wednesday is the accountability to realize that we are fallen people and that we need accountability from the outside, that we're not perfect. Yeah. And to kind of center on that, as we walk along in our life as a Christian person.
Yeah. How do you see this idea though that, I think some people who find themselves in power really truly believe that they're actually doing maybe even what they feel God called them to, and we just don't necessarily agree with it. But I don't think toxicity necessarily, or disagreement equals toxicity, does it?
Yeah, listen, we're Americans, and so we rebelled against Britain for our freedom. But I think back to like Martin Luther. You could say that he was out of line and not listening to accountability and what he did in bringing about the Protestant Reformation. And so that's what always gives me pause when I'm thinking about like, well, does this person, we all have different opinions and different perspectives on things. But there is this need for Christian accountability and for people alongside us who will remind us of the way of love. As we walk in our Christian faith. And so, that's what we've got to look at. And, just look at the toxicity. When we think about like toxicity within our bodies, that causes cancer, right?
Yeah.
If we take in toxicity. And so within the body of Christ, if we're taking in toxicity, there's cancer within the body. And so I think we as leaders, you and I and other leaders within the church, we've just got to be mindful that there can be toxic people around us that are hurting the body of Christ. And even though we may be filled with love and grace, that there is a need, such as John is doing in this letter, to call people out and to remind them of a higher calling of love and grace that's in Christ.
What's your line? Or what is it too much? As I kind of think about it, I would say when it starts impacting people I really care about, some sort of the toxicity and the people in leadership or stuff like that who are demeaning or taking down people that I truly care about and love, or who I'm trying to advocate for. I find that that's my line, but I might be more willing to kind of turn the other cheek if it's not something is really prevalent to me.
Yeah.
Which doesn't feel totally right either as I'm reflecting on it, but that's me being honest, it's like I will step up and I will fight for the people I care about. And sometimes I'll just step back when it's.
It's a hard line. It's a hard thing to know. I do think that one thing is self-awareness, which I think we've talked about before, is that sometimes the accountability that we get from the outside comes at it from a more objective viewpoint, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. When we get emotionally embedded in something, it's really hard for us to make decisions. Now, we're emotional people. God created us to be emotional. And so that's part of who we are and how we make decisions.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we can get so emotionally embedded that it's a reaction or a defense mechanism rather than trying to respond in love. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever been victim to a toxic leader or a toxic person in your
I feel like I have.
Yeah.
But I always try to check myself. But yes, I've seen that happen where, and here's the thing, and let's go back to the text that we have, because it is a good template for us.
Right.
John was willing to confront.
Yeah.
And so one thing about like trying to identify, you asked the initial question, how do we identify toxic people? If they're not willing to have a sit down conversation, then I think that's a sign of toxicity. That somehow or another we need to, in the body of Christ, be able to have conversations with one another when we disagree. If someone is just saying, no, I am cutting that off, as Diotrephes was, and saying, no, there's going to be no conversation. I'm right, they're wrong. Then, what good does it do us? Let me read something that Jesus wrote, and I'm reading it from Matthew 18. This is the traditional thing on church discipline. I'm going to read it from the Message because I like the way that Peterson kind of framed it. But he says this: if a fellow believer hurts you, go and tell him. Work it out between the two of you. If he listens, you've made a friend. If he won't listen, take one or two others along with you, that the presence of witnesses will keep things honest. I love that. Keep things honest, and try again.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get so emotional, we can't be honest about it. But, if you bring some others along with us, then that brings some objectivity to it. Then he goes on, if he still won't listen, tell the church. If he won't listen to the church, you have to start over from scratch. Confront him with the need for repentance and offer again God's forgetting love. And so, telling the whole church, that sounds like a huge thing, right? That sounds like gossip or something, but it's damaging to the church. As I said earlier, churches, businesses, nonprofits have all been hurt by toxic leaders with an agenda.
Yeah.
And so part of leadership is standing up to that. And it is a hard thing to do, but that's part of it. It is
hard, especially when it turns out to be somebody maybe you even followed for a little while, or somebody you cared about for a while. I have an example of in a church that I was a part of at one point. There was this person who I got close to, and found out that there was some stuff going on in their life, and I started seeing it really impacting their ministry. And then they became very victimized, very victim oriented, and they were grabbing everybody they could, right? And basically replaying the victim card over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
And to a point where we realized, a group of us started being like, this is a manipulation tactic.
Sure.
In order to get what they want to happen in the church, but then also B, to fill some sort of like emotional need that they had.
Right.
And like it got even just some weird points that I had to do things, or I felt victim to having to do things that I never would have loved to do again in my ministry and stuff like that. But it was hard to get to the point to where you wanted to call them out, because I called them out individually and they kind of heard me and then kind of ghosted me.
Yeah.
And part of me was like, oh, I need justice here. I need a solution here. But I eventually just kind of had to distance myself. I felt like that was the safest route for me.
Yeah. It's interesting when you said a distance, because in preparation for this, I went back to a book that's been very important to me called Boundaries. It's by Henry Cloud, who's a Christian psychologist.
Yep.
And he talks about, establishing those clear boundaries, within yourself around that. And, as you look at people, and, Cloud says that, you need to recognize that there are three different types of people. He says there are wise people. There are, I don't know if he says stupid, but I'll say stupid. There are stupid people.
All right.
And then there are evil people. And I have a real problem with him saying there's evil people. I like to think of people are good, or they may be damaged. They just do evil things. But there are people that come and are bringing about evil into an institution. And so as individuals, sometimes we can put boundaries for ourselves to protect ourselves. But then when we've been given more responsibility as leaders of something, say a church, then we have to look at what's going to be good for the whole church.
Yeah.
And, it's hard to do. It's hard to know. We want to be people of grace, but we also want to protect our mission, and we certainly want to protect our members, our congregation. So,
well, and because that's something that I think you would feel with me, is that you feel that there's a certain responsibility you have for the whole, our thing right now is to connect, grow, and serve, right?
Right.
Like to protect the ability for everybody to be able to connect, grow, and serve safely, efficiently, to be accepted and all that.
Yeah.
So to kind of watch those things and make sure that's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough. It's tough. I think it's critical in leadership to think that the people, sometimes we think that it's the vision, right? It's the vision that makes things happen. Success lies in ideas. But success, our vision, what brings us forward are people.
Yeah.
Are people. And if there are people that are toxic among us, then we've got to do something about it. And that's some of the hardest things that we have to do in life, and certainly in ministry, is to deal with that when it happens and when it comes along.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe this is too pop culture for you, but have you ever heard of the video game Among Us?
I have not. You're way younger than me.
Yeah. So it's essentially
Zelda, maybe, but
oh, that's a good. I love me some Zelda.
Okay.
But there's a video game. It's called Among Us, and the premise of the game is that you're these crewmates all trapped in this space shuttle or area, but one person is an imposter, and they're there to kind of take out the crowd, and you have to find who it is.
Yeah.
It almost sounds kind of like that. Is that like sometimes it's about finding where the problems are happening.
I just think it just takes living a life of faith and grace and having the accountability behind you and always centering yourself on Christ and realizing that we are all sinners saved by grace. To know that.
Yeah.
And to do the right thing. I always do it with love and grace, but to realize that, there's going to be some painful, hard decisions at time and cutting some people off because they're hurting the church. They're hurting other people. And we've got to do all we can to protect, and to make a safe place for people to do life, to do their faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a very prevalent topic and one that probably everybody can relate to at some level. Because even if it's not toxicity in the church, it's toxicity in another workplace, or maybe even in family or other places. So I think it's very relative to all of our life.
Yeah. Let me pull it back to two things. Just to go back to the text. It is like, is there accountability somewhere? Can you point to accountability somewhere? If you can't, then are you willing to not talk about people, but to talk to people? Mm-hmm. Those are the two things that I think we see in John. First of all, this leader was not accountable, but he was willing to talk to them.
Yeah.
And so, whatever strategy we have for dealing with toxicity within any institution, within any family, with any church, I think there's two places to start. There's a lot of other things, and it's certainly one of the most difficult things we have to deal with. This has been the most difficult of all the podcasts we've done so far, but hopefully this
because
is helpful
I
to some
think
people.
we all can relate to it. Like there are painful memories attached to it.
Right, for
Which
sure.
is not something we all like to relive.
Yeah, and people have left the church forever because of this.
Yeah.
Because we've allowed bullies to come in and do what bullies do.
Yeah.
And the thing about bullies, Nick, is like, I did this sermon one time that bullies and beggars, and they really have the same core, and there's this insecurity within them.
Mm-hmm.
And so a beggar may be trying to get your attention for whatever reason, but a bully has found another strategy for doing it. And, they both need God's grace, and no one is beyond God's redemption.
Right.
But they're never going to get better. They're never going to get better unless we are able to be healthy and to establish healthy boundaries around them. So.
Well, I think the idea of redemption and the fact that nobody is too far from grace and God is a great way to segue into our closing. But also, as Dave mentioned earlier, this is the start of Lent. This is Ash Wednesday, as you'll be seeing this. And Dave, what is your favorite thing about this season coming up? Like, well, I know this hits one of the holy points in the church calendar, and Easter's a lot of fun, but I imagine that there's something else that you really love about this time. Yeah.
One thing that I've noticed in recent years in particularly is how Ash Wednesday has become an important day. Is this marker, I was thinking about my own life. I mean, I'm a Christian pastor. I kind of live my life just as it is, but I know I'm not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do really try to have some sort of self-discipline as far as my Bible study, my devotional life, my prayer life, that sort of things. But still, I need a reset. And it's something about Ash Wednesday that is that reset. I was going to say, okay, now it's time to get serious. I'm putting on the ashes. I'm wearing that cross. And I'm walking towards Easter and trying to look at Jesus as my example.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that is a common thing among Christian people to say, look, I've blown it. And so, thankful for the grace of God. And I'm going to try to do better. I'm going to change for Lent and try to walk in that grace and walk that path behind Jesus to the cross, follow him.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I love it. Well, I had thought of an outro. Are you ready?
I'm ready for it. We need one.
We're going to see if it works, and you let us know if you like it out there. So, Dave, I think it's time for us to come up for air, and then join us next time for the deep dive.
Yeah, how long have you been holding your breath?
For a while.
That's fine.
I don't know, because we were diving.
Yeah, I get that.
I tried.
Yes,
I tried to be thematic.
We can get lost in this metaphor, but that's
we really
right.
Can.
Yeah, but yeah, it's great. But I appreciate folks listening and watching, and hope this has been helpful to you. This is a heavy subject.
Yeah, this is a hard one
today. If you've got questions about it, if you've got comments, if you'd like for us to go a little bit deeper on something, we have that email address. Email us at deepdive@hickoryflat.org, and we'll respond, I promise, and try to do our best. We don't know everything, we don't know much, but we'll work on it together.
That's right.
All right, good deal.
Right.
Yeah,
yep, sounds good. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching, listening, however you're taking in, and we'll see you next time.
All right, God bless.